Hey, it's Nancy. Before we begin today, I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Crime Beat early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. As a journalist reporting on crime for 30 years, I've covered a lot of trials. One thing I've noticed is that victims' families almost always express immense relief once the court process ends. I've seen it over and over. It's a very brief moment when they literally take a deep breath and their entire demeanor changes, as if to say, it's the end. Their body language seems to be saying, we're there. We've reached the final destination on this excruciating road, and now we can begin to try and find peace. That's how Kyla and Brian Woodhouse, Meika Jordan's mom and stepfather, looked following the Supreme Court of Canada's ruling on November 27, 2017. Canada's top court dismissed appeals by Meika's killers, Spencer Jordan and Marie Magoon. Meika's own father and stepmother had been convicted of first-degree murder for torturing, confining, and killing the 6-year-old. The Supreme Court of Canada decision automatically upheld the harshest sentence in Canadian law, which is life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years for both Jordan and Magoon. As Brian and Kyla walked down the stairs of the Supreme Court wearing matching t-shirts with Meika's photo on them, they had tears in their eyes. They smiled and took deep breaths and let out those giant sighs of relief. They had reached their destination. They battled, and to them, there was finally justice for Meika. Except, as is the case for so many victims, it wasn't the end.
It's unfathomable. I didn't even have words.
This was not about thinking about the victim. It was not about enforcing a sentence imposed on an offender. It was about, how do we get this lady out into the public as quickly as we can?
I'm Nancy Hixt, a senior crime reporter for Global News. Today, on Crime Beat, I share details of a completely unexpected update to this case. This is Fighting for Meika Jordan. If you're a longtime listener to Crime Beat, you'll remember the name Meika Jordan. Her story is the very first one I shared on this podcast, and it began by giving you a glimpse into my own home, where I have a bulletin board with photos of my husband, my family, and my cats. Time has passed, and now there are 2 new kitties. But there's one constant, and it can be found in the top right corner, where there's a photo of Meika Jordan, a 6-year-old who has deeply impacted me, though I never got to meet her. Meika would have been 21 now, and to celebrate in December of 2025, Brian and Kyla got a beautiful cake and topped it with a ladybug candle, because Meika loved ladybugs. They sang for their little girl, who they desperately wished was still with them. The most painful part is that her death was completely preventable. She should have been taken care of by those she trusted. Instead, on November 13th, 2011, there was a panicked call to 911.
Do you need fire, police, or ambulance?
Ambulance. My daughter fell down the stairs, and she's not there. She's not conscious.
That was Marie Magoon, Meika's stepmother. The little girl was rushed to the hospital in life-threatening condition. Police were called to the hospital because her injuries didn't match the explanation that Magoon and Meika's father, Spencer Jordan, provided. To doctors and investigators, Meika's injuries seemed purposeful and torturous. I need to warn you, the details of this story are disturbing. If you haven't previously listened, we've also re-released the original episode for you. Meika's hair was matted, with clumps missing. Her tiny body was covered with bruises. A 3rd-degree burn covered the palm of her hand, and she had severe abdominal injuries.
It was a difficult case, most likely my most difficult case in 30 years of law enforcement.
That's Meika Jordan. He's retired from his role with the Calgary Police Service now, but he spent 11 years as a homicide detective. He was the primary investigator assigned to Meika's case.
It looked like a child abuse situation at first, and then Meika ended up passing away the next day, and so I was assigned as the primary investigator. And we went to work for the next 11 months to uncover the truth as to what had happened to Meika.
What officers eventually discovered was that Meika had been confined and tortured for days leading up to her death. Meika's biological parents had split up. They had joint custody, which meant she spent half her time with Kyla and Brian and the rest with Jordan and Magoon.
It all started with Meika's left hand being burned with a lighter. And she did have a significant burn on her, third-degree burn on her left hand, and it took us an undercover investigation to determine exactly how that burn had occurred, which was through a lighter being held up to her hand for an extended period of time. It was the police theory that because of the burn that Meika had sustained to her left hand, it would have been very tough for both Marie Magoon and Spencer Jordan to explain this to her biological mother when Meika went back to bio-mom for the weekend. So it's our theory that that's why they kept Meika over the weekend and didn't return her to her bio-mom as per the court agreement.
That purposeful burn on her hand was just the beginning. The horrific abuse at the hands of her father and stepmother continued for days. Meika was forced to run up and down the stairs repeatedly and was beaten over and over. Jordan admitted he hit his daughter in the stomach so hard that she fell over. She also suffered several serious blows to her head. Detective Meika Jordan said, in the end, the undercover operation revealed both Jordan and Magoon had participated in the torture and ultimately caused her death.
100%. They were both convicted of first-degree murder at the Supreme Court level. And that solidified the fact that both were equally involved in the murder of Meika. The first-degree murder convictions were important, I think, for laying down case law and precedent for future cases. God forbid should they ever happen. And the precedent that was set is relation to an indictable offense that was committed during the murder, the indictable offense being unlawful confinement, which the Crown prosecutor and the court system supported. I think a case like this will always stick with you. And yes, do I keep in contact with the victim's family? I do, through social media. And, but at the end of the day and at the center of it all is a young 6-year-old little girl that was murdered. And what we're left with is a family that has to continue to live with that loss. And so this is something that all of us should keep in mind.
Brian and Kyla learned details of what happened to Meika through the lengthy court process, and it was awful for them. Kyla, understandably, broke down multiple times. They believed that the Supreme Court ruling would put an end to dealing with Meika's killers for at least 25 years, which is the earliest opportunity that they're eligible for parole. To attend hearings, you have to register with the Parole Board of Canada. I recall sending in my registration to attend and receive decisions for Magoon and Jordan right after the court process ended. At that time, I wondered if I needed to. In my mind, 25 years seemed like a lifetime away. I know from speaking with many families over the years, they often express the same feelings, and there can be a tendency to delay filling out the necessary paperwork. But in this case, I'm glad I did. I was shocked when I received a notification that one of Meika's killers was scheduled for a parole hearing in 2026, just over 10 years after they were originally sentenced. But if there's one thing I've learned in 30 years of covering crime, it's that the justice system, including the parole and correctional system, can be unpredictable. I've always said the story is never finished, and today I'm going to walk you through the latest turmoil Meika's family has had to face. Firstly, let's talk about how complicated it is for someone to get updates on a convicted person's parole situation. To start, there's the application process, which I mentioned earlier. Most people don't realize how confusing it is. And unless you've done it before, it can feel overwhelming to know which boxes to check and what information you need to provide to ensure your application is approved. You need to complete separate paperwork to attend hearings and then to receive written decisions. To top it all off, if you miss just one box, you'll only be notified by mail, not via email, which can add weeks or even months to receiving critical information, especially when there have been several mail carrier strikes and recent labor stoppages. Once you're registered, if a hearing is slated to happen, the board will push out a notification months ahead of the hearing. But at that point, no date is provided. It's just a general time period. For instance, in this case, I received an email in January stating there would be a hearing for Marie Magoon at a correctional institution in Quebec where she's currently serving her sentence. They provided a window for sometime in the month of March. The board then gives you a short deadline to confirm attendance, either in person or remotely via an online video link. But again, you need to confirm before you know the actual date. I've covered dozens of hearings and filled out dozens of applications, and it can still feel a bit daunting. And that's for me. Just think how much more stressful it is for victims and their loved ones. After I returned my initial forms, it was 2 months later, on March 10th, that I received another email from the board. This time, they provided a date. Marie Magoon had a hearing scheduled for March 19th. So I was given 9 days warning of when it was going to happen. And remember, this is happening in Quebec, halfway across the country from Calgary. I reached out to Brian and Kyla to see if they had planned to attend. Here's what Kyla had to say.
When you hear the words 25 years without a chance of parole, and all of a sudden, not even halfway through the sentence, we're literally getting a letter saying she's applying for parole. It's unfathomable. I didn't even have words in the beginning. Trying to, how are our prisoners not treated like prisoners? I don't understand it.
To make matters worse, they had no idea a date had been set. They had moved, and during that process, missed the letter notifying them of the hearing in March. This meant they had also missed the deadline confirming their attendance.
When they had sent the letter with Canada Post strike and everything going on and our relocation, it somehow kind of got lost in the background. Nobody had ever reached out to me on their end to let me know that this was going on in any other form than the one letter that was sent.
As crazy as it may seem, it was from myself, a reporter, that they found out about a hearing for the convicted killer of their daughter. They immediately contacted the parole board thinking, with more than a week until the hearing, it wouldn't be an issue to confirm their desire to attend remotely. But Brian and Kyla were shocked when officials told them they were too late and said they wouldn't be allowed to attend. Over the next 24 hours, they pushed back, thinking surely the parole board would accommodate them so they could advocate for and provide a voice for Meika. 3 days later, on March 13th, Brian and Kyla were notified that an exception had been made. They would be able to attend remotely. But there was a catch. The hearing would be entirely in French, and no translation service would be provided, which added stress to Kyla and Brian, neither of whom speaks or understands French.
We won't provide a translator for you. Basically, we're told that I said, well, I have Google Translate on my phone. Well, you can't do that because recording devices and whatnot during hearings isn't allowed, which I understand. But, at the same time, I'm really confused as to how Marie has had literal months to prepare for this, and we had less than a week. It's disgusting.
In my opinion, it was a very, very simple request, very, very easy to accommodate, and they just simply chose not to.
The language issue spurred me to inquire on my own behalf. Would they provide me, a journalist covering these proceedings, with translation services? Surprisingly, no. I was told that I'm not entitled to have the hearing translated from French to English. I emailed them back and asked them to reconsider, but parole board officials still refused. They cited a subsection of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, which says that an offender who doesn't have an adequate understanding of at least one of Canada's official languages is entitled to the assistance of an interpreter. So, despite Canada having 2 official languages, I was told that only registered victims of crime and offenders are eligible for interpreter services. Except not for Brian and Kyla, because they were late in confirming their attendance.
In all honesty, throughout this entire process, I feel as though we have been a hindrance to their plan and their progress and their operation, and that we should just be grateful for the allowances that have been extended to us.
But I wasn't about to let a language barrier stop me from attending the hearing. Marie Magoon was convicted of one of the most horrific crimes I've ever reported on. I just hoped some of my high school French would come back to me. On March 19th, 2026, Brian, Kyla, and I signed into the hearing. Because of the time difference between Quebec and Alberta, it was just after 5 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. I was a bit taken aback when I saw Marie Magoon on my screen. So was Kyla.
She was sitting at basically a boardroom table with 2 support people, one on either side of her. Hair was cleaned and pressed. I believe she had makeup on. She was wearing a blazer of sorts, very well put together. I honestly was expecting kind of like that, like you see on the court TV where they get walked up in shackles, and to see her not dressed as or appearing as a prisoner was extremely devastating. It was just, like a lady on a conference call.
As the hearing got underway, I was able to pick out a few words in French here and there, but I'll admit I'm pretty rusty after not speaking it at all for several decades, so it was frustrating. That sentiment was echoed by Brian.
They might as well have put us in a soundproof box. I mean, like, literally, you got to sit there, you get to watch body actions, you got to see images on a screen, but nothing was conveyed or allowed, and no reason or explanation why. That's the part that bothers me the most. I do not understand how, in a service that forces bilingualism, there is not some person in some office that could have been invited into this by webcam as well to sit there and translate for us. I don't get their extreme refusal to accommodate our language barrier, other than it was inconvenient.
I didn't need a translator for the one significant detail that I noticed. It was a word that wasn't said. Meika's name, which of course would be the same in English or French. The name of the 6-year-old killed by Marie Magoon was only mentioned in the hearing by her mother, Kyla Woodhouse, as she read her victim impact statement out loud.
The only time it was ever said actually is when I said it. And that is something that I actually had to ask for when I had sent in, when I had emailed my statement to the gentleman we were working with, and he read everything back over. And when he had called to go over everything with me, he actually asked if I wanted to leave her name in, because usually in these cases, again, because they know who the victim was, that it, is kind of obsolete information, so to speak. And I felt it was necessary for us and for her, because we've always said that we would be her voice. And today I feel like as little bit as it was that was offered to us, I feel like we were able to uphold that on our family's end of things. And that's the important part for me, at least.
Marie Magoon had no choice but to hear Kyla's voice and her words, which were, quote, "Meika has missed out on her entire life, junior high and high school, making friends, falling in love. I do not feel it is fair, nor is it right, that Marie get to continue her life and be allowed outside activities. First-degree murder of a child should come with a lifetime punishment. I ask you today to please consider denying this application. Marie is a danger to those around her and does not deserve to live a life outside of prison." End quote.
She heard my voice. She heard me say Meika's name, and that's what we always wanted. We wanted to be the voice. We wanted to make sure that her memory lived on.
Then the hearing continued in French. I watched Magoon's face closely for any sign of emotion, but honestly, I didn't see any. She seemed completely unbothered, oddly neutral, and almost detached, unaffected. A few times, she spoke an English word, perhaps not knowing the French equivalent to certain words or phrases like self-talk or resourceful. To Kyla, it seemed unfair that Magoon was fully supported through the process.
As we've well learned throughout these last few years, it seems that the offenders actually have more rights and leeways and processes than the victims do. She was able to sit at that table today and have her support people help her with the French words that she couldn't remember. But, the victims were sitting there trying to piece together the little bits of broken French that we know from learning it in school and trying to make our way through it.
I've previously covered countless hearings, so I know the format regardless of language. Generally, the parole board hears from several people from inside the correctional system who deal directly with the offender and can speak to any progress they've made or lack thereof, depending on the case. After that, the board members will ask the offender questions. They generally canvass any insight the offender might have into the crime itself and what led them to do it. Once the board is satisfied that they've asked all relevant questions, they break and deliberate. I should note, in Magoon's case, the board did not provide any specifics on what she was seeking ahead of the hearing. I knew it couldn't be day or full parole. It's too soon. But to have a hearing, she had to be seeking a special leave or accommodation outside of the correctional facility. During the break, as board members deliberated, officials took some time to speak with Brian and Kyla.
The gentleman that we're working with on the parole board side of things kind of gave us the key points at the end.
They were told Magoon had made great strides in recent years and that she's the president of the inmate committee. Brian saw it less as progress and more as deliberate plotting by Magoon to get what she wants.
She had been helpful in helping other inmates with their applications for hearings related to outings and children specifically. It boggles my mind. So not only is she, still being involved in things she clearly shouldn't even be involved in, but she's learning the system through the errors of others, right? She's helping. She's getting insider information, access to the paperwork. She knows what boxes to fill out. She knows the results of filling out each box and with what answer. She basically had the opportunity to allow every other inmate who's been through this process before her from her facility to pave the way for her by figuring out what not to do. It's like every door was opened for her to glide through this process. And in that process of opening those doors, they were shut in our faces. One of the things that was mentioned throughout this process was how they were not looking at the entirety of her incarcerated period. They acknowledged, and in fact made her acknowledge, that there have been violent offenses. There have been, I think he called them issuances, or there's been notes on her file, right? She's been in trouble while being incarcerated. However, for the past couple of years, she's done really, really well. So that's the part they're going to look at. They're only going to consider the 2 or 3 years where she finally learned how to navigate the system and put on the act and go through the steps that she needed in order to ensure her success today.
Following the board's deliberations, the hearing resumed. The presiding member delivered the decision in English. That's when I learned Magoon was seeking escorted temporary absences, or ETAs, from the institution. She was asking to leave the facility for 8 hours once a month with caseworkers to spend time with her brother. The board said she meets the full criteria they use to decide in these cases and noted her risk is considered low in terms of violence. The board said Magoon is now able to handle her emotions and exhibits exemplary behavior. In granting her request, the board said it's, quote, desirable for her to be out of the penitentiary to start gradually reintegrating into society, end quote. Kyla was astonished.
Much like every other person she's encountered, she was able to manipulate them and make them think that she is somehow a victim in this situation. She had brought up some childhood issues and, traumas from her past and things like that made her act out this way. And I know a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds that have come from a lot of traumas, and that's not something that you can speak to like that. I know people that have gone through, some crazy things as kids and are now members of organizations that help kids. There's people out there that have become social workers and, criminologists and reporters like yourself, and they help people that are hurting instead of hurting them more. The most disgusting part, there's so many members of our family that would love to spend one more hour with the life that was taken from us. She gets to go and see her brother and try to, what was the words that they used? Rebuild family bonds. What about our family's bonds? What about my other children that have had to grow up hearing stories about their sister? It's not fair that she is able to go out and have this life that she thinks she's deserving of or entitled to, and there isn't even a regard for our lives or our families or how it makes us feel.
Brian was outraged.
You'll have to understand what little faith I did have in our Canadian justice system was completely shattered today. So I don't really take the truth of what we're told as truth and gospel. But we have submitted all the applications required of us. We have filled out the dozens of legal forms, of government forms, applications, requests, permissions. We have filled out everything. We have submitted absolutely everything that there is to submit. We are told that we are now included on the list to be included in all upcoming hearings, and that the request is already on file for them to all be translated if they cannot be completed in English. The message it sends to me is that offenders do and likely always will have more rights than anybody else when it comes to the justice system, especially victims. Victims are an afterthought. It's all about making sure the offender feels good, make them happy, placate their emotional status, their needs, their supports. Let's not think about the innocence of the lives that they've snuffed out. Let's not think about the detriment to everybody left in their wake. That's all behind us now. We don't think about that when we look at moving this one individual forward.
3.5 weeks after the hearing, the board sent out a written decision. I had previously been told my copy would be in French. However, when I received the email, they said they were exceptionally providing a translated copy of the decision in English that was originally rendered in French. Written decisions are generally longer and more in-depth, so this provided further insight into what Magoon told the board and what she's been doing while in custody. Her case management team said that she had long pleaded her innocence and engaged in numerous appeal processes, but now admits full and complete guilt and expresses regret for her actions. During the hearing, Magoon had told the board she was, quote, immature and poorly equipped to be a mother at the time of the offenses, and acknowledged she used violence to manage her emotions, and trivialized and normalized violence because of the way she was raised, end quote. The board said she received psychiatric treatment in the institution and had been diagnosed with the presence of a borderline personality disorder and an anxiety disorder. She also presented with post-traumatic stress disorder that included dissociative symptoms, anxiety, and depressive components. She began psychological treatment in December of 2021, and favorable progress has been noted. By 2024, her doctor reported that her borderline personality disorder and a substance abuse disorder were in extended remission. Her dependent and antisocial personality traits that were present at the beginning of her sentence have reportedly diminished to a subclinical level. A psychologist's assessment concluded that Magoon presents a low risk of violently reoffending and a moderate risk of general reoffending. Her escape risk is also assessed as low. The offenses that had taken place inside the institution, the ones Brian mentioned earlier, were highlighted in the written decision. The board said she had trafficked her medication inside in 2018. In 2019, a conflict with another inmate degenerated to blows, but they went on to say that was an isolated incident and that she's respectful to authority, though there was a disciplinary breach for a minor report in 2022. Also, we now know this is not Magoon's first ETA. She had been previously allowed to attend a funeral and had been escorted out of the institution for medical reasons. The board said all of these absences went well. You might also be surprised to learn that Magoon, convicted of first-degree murder, has been in a minimum security institution since 2024, a change that happened less than 10 years after Meika was killed. Inside the facility, she attends school, holds down stable jobs, and has received outside perimeter access for work purposes. Magoon is not Indigenous, but according to the document, has become an honorary member of the Indigenous institutional community to undertake what the board refers to as, quote, a healing path, though officials did not elaborate on what that means. Understandably, Brian and Kyla are skeptical of Magoon's transformation.
This is kind of a worry that I had in the beginning, is because she is smarter than she lets on. And she has done, I guess, what any smart criminal would do in the long-term plan. She's been attending classes and going through courses and, doing all these positive things to make herself look good, not to better herself as a human, just to make it look that way for the board so that she can get days like this. I mean, there was a point in time where she almost had me convinced that she hadn't done anything to Meika that weekend. She's very good at using the right words and pulling the right emotions and, pointing in directions, going around in circles until you think that she's the smart one in the room.
It says to me that they would rather have her out in society as an expense to you and I, as opposed to incarcerated where she belongs as an expense to them.
They told me they feel helpless after the decision. They're now registered to receive notifications via email and plan to attend all future hearings. They've filled out the same paperwork for Spencer Jordan, though so far haven't received any correspondence to suggest he's seeking release. Kyla said despite this setback, they just hope justice will somehow prevail and that her little girl's voice will be heard.
We're still speaking to her name. We're still continuing on her story and her legacy, and we will be at the next date, and I will write another letter and another one and another one. And if I ever get the chance to be there in person, I'm going to try that too. We celebrate her every day here at home. Her ashes and her picture and a bunch of her ladybug stuff is all in a china cabinet that sits directly behind our dining room table. So she sits with us every night when we eat dinner, with the kids every morning when they eat breakfast. She's still very much part of our lives every single day.
I want to thank Brian and Kyla for their ongoing help to share their little girl's story and the updates that inevitably continue to scar them as they continue their fight for Meika. And thank you for joining me. Crime Beat is written and produced by me, Nancy Hixt, with senior producer Dila Velasquez. Audio editing and sound design is by Rob Johnston. Special thanks to photographer-editor Danny Lantella for his work on this episode. And thanks to Chris Bassett, the VP of Network Content, Production and Distribution, and Editorial Standards for Global News. I would love to have you tell a friend about this podcast. There are 7 seasons of stories you can listen to and share. And please consider rating and reviewing Crime Beat on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. You can find me on Facebook at Nancy Hixt Crime Beat and on Instagram at nancy.hixt. Thanks again for listening. Please join me next time.